She thought about her son, about raising him in a safe place, about the small joys of life she had almost forgotten. The warmth of hope filled her chest, slowly replacing the fear and despair that had consumed her for so long. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the cabin, Red turned to Martha and spoke gently. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to reclaim what you've lost and ensure no one can harm you again. For now, focus on your boy and yourself." Martha nodded, her eyes glistening. She felt safe in a way she had not felt for weeks. Samuel yawned, curling against her as she held him close. The fear that had threatened to overwhelm her seemed far away, replaced by the quiet comfort of protection and hope. That night, as Martha lay with Samuel in her arms, she thought about the events of the day. The auction, the fear, the cruelty. It had been overwhelming, almost unbearable. But then, the courage of Red Lawson had changed everything. One person's bravery had stood against injustice and had made all the difference. Martha realized that even in a harsh world, goodness could prevail. She whispered softly to Samuel, "We're safe now. We'll be okay." The baby cooed in response, and for the first time in days, Martha allowed herself to sleep, knowing they were protected. In the days that followed, Red continued to help Martha. He ensured that the cabin remained safe, bringing food and supplies when needed. He guided her on how to rebuild a small garden to provide fresh vegetables, and helped her understand the small ways to keep Samuel healthy and happy. Martha learned to trust him completely. His presence was steady and calm, a reminder that even in the darkest times, people could act with courage and kindness. The town of Redridge began to change as well. The story of the auction spread quickly, and people who had once been indifferent began to question their own actions. Every action was watched, every decision discussed. Molly began to feel the eyes of Pine Creek on her, and while some attention was encouraging, too much scrutiny made her nervous. She wanted to succeed quietly, but in a town where everyone knew each other, privacy was rare. As the installation of the irrigation system progressed, small issues arose. Pipes shifted in the loose soil, sprinklers sprayed unevenly, and minor leaks developed. Each problem required immediate attention, and the presence of neighbors watching only increased the stress for both Tom and Molly. Tom, experienced and careful, supervised the adjustments with precision, ensuring nothing was damaged. Molly learned quickly, asking questions, observing, and sometimes making suggestions that surprised even Tom with their practicality. The process also brought unexpected moments of connection. Tom and Molly shared quiet conversations while measuring distances and checking pipes. They began to understand each other better, not just as neighbors negotiating property lines, but as individuals with histories, motivations, and challenges. Tom learned about Molly's family, her dreams for her farm, and the hard work she had put into a small piece of land. Molly, in turn, discovered stories about the ranch, the generations of Harris family history, and the effort it had taken to maintain such a large property. These conversations didn't erase tension entirely, but they created a sense of mutual respect that hadn't existed at the beginning. Meanwhile, gossip in town continued. Some residents criticized Tom for seeming too lenient, while others praised him for showing patience and fairness. Molly's determination became a point of admiration, especially among young farmers and women in town who saw her persistence as inspiring.
He realized that she had not only survived but had thrived in the midst of danger, and that he had learned as much from her as she had from him.
The forest outside the cabin remained unpredictable, yet inside a fragile sense of order had taken hold.
Death to the turncoat. They were no longer simply survivor and patient. They were partners in navigating the challenges of the world around them. Each day, each task, each small success reinforced the delicate balance they had created, a balance built on trust, respect, and the shared goal of survival. The surgeon began to understand that the bond they had formed was not simply about healing a wound. It was about understanding each other, recognizing strengths, and accepting the presence of another in a world that had long demanded isolation and self-reliance. He saw in her resilience a reflection of the best qualities he had thought lost in himself: courage, intelligence, and the willingness to face danger head-on. As night fell again, they sat together by the fire, sharing silence rather than words. The forest outside whispered with the sounds of life and danger, yet inside there was warmth, light, and the quiet sense of connection. Both had survived the immediate threats, yet both understood that life would continue to test them in ways they could not yet predict. The strength of their bond would be essential, not only for survival but for understanding, trust, and the slow, careful rebuilding of hope in a world that had shown them little mercy. In that moment, the surgeon realized that the woman's presence had changed everything. She had challenged him, demanded honesty, and forced him to reconsider his own assumptions about trust, strength, and the nature of survival. Their lives were now intertwined, each dependent on the other in ways both practical and profound. In these moments, Elias understood the deeper meaning of healing. It was not just the repair of broken bones, but the rebuilding of trust, confidence, and community. By the end of the recovery period, the young woman was strong enough to walk confidently with the villagers' support. She smiled easily now, laughing quietly as she performed daily chores. Elias felt a profound satisfaction, knowing that his work had not only saved her life but restored a sense of independence and dignity. The villagers treated him with respect, offering gratitude in gestures, words, and quiet acknowledgement. They had witnessed a stranger risk everything for one of their own, and that act had forged a lasting bond. Elias reflected on the experience as he prepared for what was next. He knew his time in the settlement would eventually end. His journey through the desert was ongoing, and other people would need his help. Yet he also realized that this place, these people, and this young woman had changed him as much as he had helped them. He had found a sense of purpose, a connection to life, and a deeper understanding of what it meant to heal. Redemption, he now knew, was measured not in fame or recognition, but in quiet, persistent action. As he packed his medical kit, Elias looked at the young woman one last time before he would leave. She was standing confidently, surrounded by the villagers who had supported her through recovery. Her eyes met his, and a silent understanding passed between them. He had saved her life, yes, but more than that, he had given her strength, hope, and a sense of security. In turn, she and the community had given him trust, respect, and a glimpse of redemption he had long thought impossible. And so, as Elias prepared to continue his journey through the vast, unforgiving desert, he carried with him a renewed sense of purpose.
She was not just enjoying his company. She was learning to trust again, to open her heart, and to accept that happiness could come unexpectedly, even later in life. And Caleb, with his quiet confidence, kindness, and patience, was teaching her that connection and love were not limited by age, circumstance, or expectation. One evening, as they watched the sunset together from the porch of her house, Caleb turned to Martha and said, "You know, I've never met anyone like you. You've lived a full life, faced challenges, and yet you still have this light inside you. I don't care what anyone else thinks. I just want to be with you." Martha felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. For so long she had doubted herself, doubted the possibility of love, and doubted her own worth. But here was a man who saw her fully, who valued her experience, and who wanted to share life with her. She reached for his hand, feeling the warmth and strength in his touch, and realized that the decision was no longer about fear or doubt. It was about choosing to embrace joy and connection wholeheartedly. "Yes," she said softly, her voice steady and full of certainty. "I want that too. I want us, Caleb." He smiled, a quiet, happy smile, and they sat together hand in hand, watching the sky turn shades of pink and gold. In that moment, Martha felt a profound sense of peace and exhilaration. She had taken a risk, allowed herself to be vulnerable, and opened her heart to the possibility of happiness, and it had been worth every ounce of fear she had felt. For Martha Reynolds, life had begun a new chapter, a chapter filled with hope, joy, and the kind of connection she had once thought impossible. And as she sat there, holding Caleb's hand, she realized that sometimes the greatest rewards come when we allow ourselves to take chances, to trust, and to love without apology.
Ahuli's body ached, and she longed for rest, but the threat of capture forced them to keep moving. They found a small grove of trees, offering shade and a brief chance to rest. Auli drank water, ate some dried berries, and allowed herself a few moments to catch her breath. The protector remained vigilant, scanning the horizon for any sign of the soldiers. Even in moments of rest, he did not let his guard down. Night began to fall, bringing relief from the heat, but also new dangers. The desert could hide them in darkness, but it could also conceal obstacles, cliffs, and predators. Ahuli felt the weight of exhaustion pressing on her, but she knew she had to keep going. Her protector guided her to a hidden cave, almost invisible among the rocks. Here, they could rest safely, at least for a few hours. Inside the cave, Ahuli looked at him and finally spoke. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "You risk everything to protect me." He shook his head. "We survived together," he replied simply. "That is enough," his calm voice reassured her, and she realized that survival was not just about hiding or running. It was about courage, trust, and partnership. She felt a deep sense of gratitude knowing that she was no longer alone in this fight. The night passed slowly, with the stars shimmering overhead. Ahuli thought of her family, her village, and the danger that had forced her into the desert. She also thought of her protector, the hero who had shielded her from harm and guided her through the perilous terrain. She understood that courage came in many forms, and sometimes the bravest act was standing between danger and someone who could not protect themselves. As dawn approached, the first light of morning crept over the horizon. Ahuli and her protector prepared to move again. The soldiers were still out there, relentless and determined, but they had survived another day.
Conversations in the general store, at church, and over fences often returned to the irrigation pipe, but the focus gradually shifted from conflict to lessons learned. Despite the tension and public attention, a sense of progress emerged. The irrigation system was completed without damage. Boundaries were clearly marked, and both parties were satisfied with the practical outcome. Yet the emotional consequences lingered. Tom reflected on how quickly emotions could escalate, even among neighbors with good intentions. He realized that pride and stubbornness, while natural, needed to be balanced with patience, understanding, and communication. Molly reflected on her own experience, recognizing that courage alone was not enough. Empathy, careful listening, and diplomacy were equally important. The town of Pine Creek, having witnessed the event, also reflected on the meaning of community. People saw firsthand how quickly disputes could grow and how carefully they needed to be managed. The story became an informal lesson for others in the town: how to approach conflicts, how to communicate, and how to balance personal interests with respect for neighbors. In many ways, the incident strengthened the town's sense of togetherness. Local children who had watched the drama unfold also learned a subtle lesson. They saw that disagreements could be resolved without yelling, that listening mattered, and that even stubborn people could find common ground. The event became a story passed down through casual conversations, a reminder that even ordinary situations could carry extraordinary lessons. For Tom, the days following the installation were reflective. He spent time walking his property, checking fences, and thinking about how he had reacted in the heat of the moment. He realized that his initial anger was a product of pride and fear, and he made a quiet promise to approach future conflicts with more calm and patience.
And in the quiet glow of the fire, he understood that whatever the coming days might bring, they would face them together, each learning from the other, each growing stronger in the shared knowledge that they could survive and thrive, even in the midst of danger. The days grew longer as winter slowly gave way to early spring. The forest around the cabin began to show signs of change. Buds appeared on the trees, the air carried the fresh scent of melting snow, and birds returned to fill the quiet with their songs. Inside the cabin, the surgeon noticed subtle changes in the woman as well. She moved with ease and confidence now, her wounds fully healed, her strength restored, and her sharp eyes constantly scanning the world with the awareness that had always kept her alive. He had grown accustomed to her presence, to the quiet understanding they shared. The cabin, once a solitary refuge, had become a place of cooperation, learning, and trust. He realized that the bond they had formed went beyond survival. It was built on mutual respect, patience, and the recognition of each other's courage. Yet he also knew that the time would come when she could no longer remain hidden, when her path would demand that she return to her people or continue her journey through the forest. One morning he awoke to find her standing by the window, looking out over the forest with a calm intensity. She did not speak, but her posture suggested readiness. She had regained her independence fully, and he could see the quiet determination in her eyes. He understood immediately what this meant. She was preparing to leave, to face the world beyond the cabin that had sheltered her for so many weeks. He approached her slowly, speaking in his soft, deliberate tone. "You are ready," he said, using the few words they shared, and he gestured toward her strong, healed body. She nodded slightly, acknowledging the truth of his words. The desert had tested him, challenged him, and shown him that even in the harshest conditions, courage, compassion, and skill could transform lives. He had healed a young woman, touched a community, and in the process begun to heal himself. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in years, Elias felt that he was exactly where he was meant to be, a healer, a teacher, and a quiet force of hope in a world that often seemed unforgiving. The sun rose slowly over the desert, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and gold. Elias Monroe sat quietly outside the small dwelling where the young woman had recovered, taking in the morning air. For weeks he had stayed with her, helping her heal, teaching the villagers how to care for her, and slowly regaining a sense of purpose that had long been buried. Now, he knew his time in the settlement was coming to an end. Other people in the desert would need his help, and he could not remain in one place forever. He looked at the young woman, standing confidently with the villagers nearby. She had regained her strength, her movements were steady, and she had even begun helping others with small tasks. Her eyes met his, and in that silent moment, Elias understood the depth of the connection they had built. He had saved her life, yes, but he had also helped her regain confidence and independence. She had taught him as much about trust, courage, and resilience as he had taught her about healing. The villagers approached him quietly, offering small gifts and gestures of thanks. A basket of food, a blanket, and a small carved figure were placed in his hands. Elias accepted them with humility, knowing that these tokens were not just gratitude. They were respect and trust, earned through weeks of dedication. The elders nodded at him silently, their eyes reflecting understanding and appreciation. Elias felt a warmth in his chest, a feeling he had not experienced in years.